There's a myth that game testing, or quality assurance as it's formally called, is not a real job. But that's just not true. Quality assurance testing is an important part of a game's development that often goes undervalued or, in the worst cases, completely overlooked. There's also a common misconception that game testing is just playing games all day and getting paid for it. But enjoying playing games is just a prerequisite for being a tester. Your job as a tester isn't to play the game, your job is to break it. Observe it carefully and document your findings, and suggest ways to improve the experience. Why is game testing important? You are ensuring the quality of the experience for players, and you do that by helping to find issues before the game releases. What happens when a game doesn't get tested enough before its release? Then it's your players that will encounter all the problems, and the experience they have with your released game will be impacted negatively. Even if your game is incredibly enjoyable, if it has too many issues, it will be frustrating for players. People will avoid games that are poorly received by their peers and popular influencers. It's very difficult to restore a game's poor image in the eyes of players after the damage has been done. So it's much better to make sure your game is tested thoroughly and in good shape prior to releasing it, even if that means it needs more time and development to correct significant issues. So what's different between just playing a game and testing one? The approach you take to playing changes. Sometimes with game testing, you have to repeatedly test one small part of the game over and over until you can fully determine what went wrong and why. It's not the same as just playing through a game for fun. Your goal as a tester is to help make sure people are able to enjoy the game when the time comes. You might even have to test games you wouldn't normally play or enjoy yourself. And if an issue is particularly tricky to resolve, it may require multiple days of focused attention. Here are the things I look for when I am testing a game to give you an idea of what the process is like. First, does it start up properly? This seems obvious, but it's an incredibly important aspect to make sure it is fully functional. If your game has trouble running on your targeted hardware, then it's like trying to fly a plane that can't lift off the ground. Then I take into consideration the genre of the game and what to expect from it. If it's not a genre you are familiar with, you may have to imagine a person who really enjoys that type of game and what they might be looking for in an experience like this. Ultimately, the question you are trying to answer would be, is this game fun? But the answer to that varies from person to person, so you have to be open-minded in these kinds of assessments. One way to do this reliably is to get a sense for any pain points or things that cause you frustration as you are playing. Anything that feels off and frustrating will lower the overall feeling of enjoyment. And if they are frustrating you as you play, there will be others who feel the same. This is a good example of something you would want to suggest an alternative approach for in order to reduce the feelings of frustration. Next are the visuals, and I don't just mean how great the graphics look, although that's important to consider too. Are there any issues that you notice visually? Does anything feel off or strange? Is what you are seeing normal for that kind of game, or does it feel out of place? There are far too many considerations to mention here, but the important thing is to observe the game carefully and document anything that you think might be an issue, even if it later turns out it was by design. The same goes for audio issues. Does the audio play when it's supposed to? Does it stop when it should? Do the character voices sound fitting to their personality and come across well? Or do they feel unconvincing and ill-suited to the scene? What about the soundtrack? Does the music fit the game well? Are the right emotions being evoked from scenes through the music? Or are the chosen tracks all over the place? Or maybe from a music genre that seems to poorly fit the style of the game? How about your controls and the game's interface? Does it feel natural and intuitive once you know the basics, or are they hard to use effectively? Can you think of a better control scheme or layout to try? Does some feature feel overly complex when it could be simplified? Are the controls just not very responsive in general? Are the game's features and concepts explained to players in a sensible manner? Does it feel like you have no idea what's going on in the story? Or is the flow and progression of events logical and convincing? Do your characters feel genuine and interesting, or are they boring and generic? These kinds of questions, and many more, are what testers need to consider while they play. A tester's task is not simply playing a game. It's analyzing the game's individual aspects, drawing from your years of personal gaming experiences to think of ways that other games have solved similar issues yours is facing, and just in general doing your best to recommend ways to improve the game as a whole. You need a high degree of attention to detail to consider all of these factors as you test, and this is why game studios often have large numbers of people test their games at once. One person's play experience and perspectives may help, but ideally you need a wider variety of input from testers. Not only do people see things differently, but each play experience is unique even if they are all playing the same content, so things may happen in one session and not another. This further helps with tracking down potential issues. So why is game testing worth paying people to do? One very good reason is saving time. Programmers, marketers, artists, designers, and everyone else involved in creating games already have many demands on their time. It's common for testing to be handled by other roles in their spare time if a company decides against onboarding testers. But by hiring people to be testers for their games, they can ensure that games are thoroughly tested while still being able to focus their time on their own respective tasks. Another reason is simply that some people are very well suited to testing games, and not everyone has the knack for it. Testers often have to intentionally try to play the game in ways you normally would not, with the goal being to break things in unconventional ways, and discover as many issues prior to release as possible. In some cases, testing games is a temporary job. That's just by the nature of things. If you have one game and you need it to be tested before release, there may only be a few weeks or months period where testing is required. Once the majority of issues have been identified and resolved, testers will then move on to other projects. But the opposite can also be true. In fact, some bigger studios have permanent testing teams that they keep on staff year-round. This scenario makes sense too, because you might have 2 or 3, or even half a dozen games or more in development at the same time by various teams within a larger company. Rather than doing all the testing in one big batch, some studios prefer to do more frequent testing on a smaller scale with new builds or as issues arise. So keeping testers on staff not only allows these studios to handle larger volumes of testing needs across multiple upcoming games, but it also means that they can ensure their team of testers is reliable and trustworthy. If you're doing one-off testing projects and cutting everyone loose again after that, the quality of the results of the testing periods may be more volatile by comparison. When a testing session is finished, next comes the feedback. Testers need to thoroughly document the steps they took whenever they find issues. Sometimes this is done using special hardware that records your gameplay and inputs. Other times it is primarily through written reports and feedback after the testing session has concluded. The more information that can be conveyed about what, how, and why something occurred during a test, the more likely it is that the issue can be reproduced and eventually resolved. Thus, it is important for a tester to be able to provide detailed feedback about their play experiences, as well as their own thoughts and suggestions about each issue. And some folks, like myself, offer freelancing services to help people test their games. If you know someone who needs a reliable and detailed tester for their game project, you can find a link to my commissions page in the description of this video. So the next time you hear someone say game testing isn't a real job worth paying for, or who thinks that all testers do is get paid to play games all day, now you can help them understand that there is a lot more to it than that, and that quality assurance is an important part of the game creation process. I hope you enjoyed this video, and that you feel like you got something worthwhile out of it. If you're interested in some of my playtesting videos, you can click here for the full playlist. Thank you for watching. See you again soon.